Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Mel. What's new with you? Nothing's changed in the world, I don't think, this week.
No, same old, same old.
Same old, same old.
Yeah,
Breathing in and out, breathing in and out.
that's right.
What is today's topic?
I think we could explore the different ideas around time.
That's wonderful. I've been wanting to talk about this for some time. I think that's a great topic. It's one of those things that's behind everything that we don't usually talk about. It influences so much. And right now, I have a feeling that time is somewhat broken in a certain way,
Hmm.
or that our relationship to time is broken. There are things, I look back in my practice before and after about 2000, really, and I've been in practice forever. Around 2000, things started to change, and I first noted it in the seasonal pulses. In nature, rivers have tides, but a tide for a river in nature means how it changes through the seasons. And that change is reflected in the pulses we feel. So in springtime, your pulse should feel a certain way, in summer, another way. And that used to be pretty regular with some variation. And around 2000, something started to break in which that pattern of seasonality became much more erratic. Um, and that's progressed over the last 20 years to now it's pretty erratic. And then around 2010, 2012, new problems seem to emerge about the way people were fixated on screens. And these are things that, a person might come in with lupus or an elbow pain or something like that, and you're focused on that. But these are behind the scenes things that are influencing all the illnesses we treat. Um, and so it's really interesting. You think of something like Chinese medicine, you think it's really quite old and there's not innovation is not part of it. Just follow the old books, right? But innovation is actually central to Chinese medicine. There's been innovation forever. And innovation means seeing something new and then returning to your source of knowledge, which is in the past, which is in our old books, and say, how do we innovate for what we're seeing now? So people now are having these new illnesses, which I don't even know the words for, but I might call them time sicknesses or technology illnesses or social media problems or something like that, and where time and rhythm have been disrupted in a big way. And they're in every healthcare encounter, but they're things that we don't talk about. So they're behind the scenes. So I'm glad we're talking about it today. Do you have any similar feelings from your practice?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, my practice, because it's a lot of it is lifestyle medicine. We focus on this at the outset. So we our relationship with cycles, daily cycles, technology, light is just built. It's built in, and people. I try to put a little bit of friction between people working with me because people need to be ready to kind of look at this stuff. And I think an increasing number of people are, but it's wrapped in everything. I look a lot at this idea of waves waving within waves, that this researcher Irv Dardick came up with, um, and I think that's tied to this idea of the universe being a breath. And the way I think about time is, uh, which frequency of breath are you looking at? You've got like the only inhale and exhale that creates our entire universe. You've got daily inhales and exhales. You've got ones that last, that go kind of billions of times a second, and so on. And so one aspect there's I think time sickness, or this rupture with cycles, is at the root of just about everything. And there's lots of different ways you can look at it. One is that when people try to get fancy with their like biochemistry and epigenetics, uh, over half of our genome expression, our epigenetics, is shifted on a 24-hour cycle.
Yeah. Wow.
Over half. So that's a very high leverage point. So sometimes people think about improving their relationship with daily cycles and then seasonal cycles as a kind of nice to have or not super crucial. And it's like, And do you know anything else that flips on and off half over half of your genes on a daily,
It's amazing.
right? So, yeah, I think there's a lot there.
And in a way, it's as if we, well, not in a way, we are creatures of rhythm and time. If you think like, how did life begin? And you go way, way back in the Wayback Machine and go down to the ocean where the vents were before anything was alive, and what was happening there, and why did these molecules that were created in the sun, come down to the earth, and now they're starting to bounce around and form in a certain way that's going to be life, right? And the only way that one of the prerequisites for that is rhythm. So when we look at our world versus a nebula out in space, which is turning amorphously, one of the features of our world is rhythm, and that's based on the sun and the passage around the sun and so forth, and the seasons. And that's really required for everything in nature to have this rhythm, because that rhythm allows these molecules, which will become life, to form themselves in different configurations. So, really, we are configurations of rhythm. And these rhythms they've created us and sustained us for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, we're kind of changing all that. And they're still there. But it's not just that you don't get enough sleep, it's that nature is built on rhythm. We're built on rhythm. And also, we need rhythm to breathe. So, like, if you need to know where you're going, nature needs to feel what's coming next. If everything's chaotic, it's very hard for breath to occur. I call this the growing into space. And it's a problem, especially I see with younger people now, where when the world gets a little more chaotic, that feeling of what is the growing into space is diminished. For example, I'm older in my life. If I went to school and got a job, I knew could get a family, and then live in a place and retire and all those things. That's kind of a rhythm and a growing into space, which has now changed a lot. So even with plants and animals, it's hard for them to know what to do when rhythms are changing all the time. So it's like a huge deal. Yeah.
It Yeah, it's a huge deal, and, the 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 aspect with technology, there's a few things built into that. So, one is this question about light exposure. If we look at it from the more, kind of modern scientific perspective, the largest biological cue, or the largest part of the biological cue, is light. So, we don't, I think from maybe an aging perspective, we wouldn't want to slice it up so finely. We would just, right, we would just kind of have nature breathing. But if we were to slice it up, we would say that we can kind of give a stronger indication to an organism of when it is by changing its light than anything else. So one issue is this exposure of light through the eyes. And one thing I came across relatively recently, which kind of blew my mind, is nowadays in modern societies, girls are starting their periods earlier and earlier and earlier. This is a form of time sickness because there's something being shifted about maturation uh, in this modern environment that is novel and maybe I shouldn't say if it's good or bad, but it's different anyways. And I'd always assumed that this was due to things like endocrine disruptors, the birth control pill in the water and that sort of thing. But actually, there's increasing evidence that this is due to blue light exposure. Because if you think about what would happen if nature is breathing itself normally on a natural cycle and you have these normal daily fluctuations of light, then the blue light is strongest in the morning and it gives us a signal of this is morning. And now if you're a young person and you're just staring at blue light, it's basically telling your brain morning, 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 and it's speeding up your biological clock. You're aging faster, and so they could see even during the pandemic that uh, this trend accelerated and that it was tied to blue light. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is that the devices being designed to be addictive, they're exploiting this dopamine reward, but that's also a cycle, like a kind of input, stimulus, response, effect, dopamine. And again, that's supposed to happen at the end of like a hunt,
Right.
that might happen like after hours or days or something, and they're just letting you scroll, 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 and so that's also speeding that up. That not only do you need to not go through the physical exertion and cooperation preparation to get to win the dopamine prize, but now it's vastly speeding it up. So as soon as you put it down, you're incredibly bored because of this
It's your
rhythm issue,
and you're exhausted.
and you're exhausted.
Right. And when there's no when the time rhythm is not there, also the restoration of life is not there.
Mhm.
So when you look around you and you see everybody looking exhausted, and one of the reasons is there's no restoration phase in breath where you're doing nothing and the sky is dark, and things like that. And when we talk about time sicknesses, there's like I see it in several levels. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, but the first level I see is the reversal of root branch relationships. Which, what does that mean? In the past, we knew that our past fed us, the past wisdoms of our people, the practices, our knowledge, and that's the way breath actually works. There's a root of breath, and something extends out from that, and then it returns to renew in that root of breath. But somewhere around the 17th century, around in there somewhere about the time of the Industrial Revolution, that changed so that we stopped looking towards the past and we kind of threw it out in a certain way. And then we started looking to the future. So the future became our root. So then we turn time on its head. Like, it's not the past that's going to sustain us, it's what's coming that's going to sustain us. And that was kind of like the first big time shift that I see here. And that's a problem because people don't know where they come from, where their knowledge is. They don't understand nature is what supports them. That's the first root. And it's really caused a lot of confusion. And any thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely right. And as someone who was born and raised in the United States, but I've had the opportunity to travel and live in other places, I
Mhm.
feel like that's especially pronounced in the United States, which is a relatively younger country. And I think it's uh, spread as a value to value things that are new and cutting edge and shiny as that it's kind of a more efficient way to grow the economy. That if you are looking for something, instead of looking not to just what you have materially, like physically, but looking to what you already know, looking what you know how to do, looking at what you already have, versus like that thing is dumb. Like, it's so stupid. They didn't know any better then. Like, look at what this new thing, you know? I feel like it's a way to stimulate growth, and I feel like sure, this exists in some way everywhere. It's not unique to the United States, but at least my own individual sense when I've gone other places is that it's just blown up to an absurd degree here, in a way that in other places where there still is traditions, or even architecturally. Like, if you go to different places that are old, it's kind of harder to erase the past because it's structurally still there. Whereas uh, in most, a lot of places in the United States, they just make, they just create to make it look like whatever they want, and so it accentuates this time sickness.
Yeah, that's very true. Um, and then this other level that happened, which is about somehow introduced with devices, technology, light pollution, things like that. And when we look at screens, for example, there's so much going on there where we spend our times. I think we talked about it in the past about how your vision entrains to this point right in front of you, and that's really the way your nervous system is when the sympathetic system is activated and you're supposed to be attending to something special versus when you're relaxed and you have this peripheral or relaxed gaze. So we're focused in on this one thing, and then it's flashing its lights at us and doing all these things just like a slot machine, tying into all those. But the thing about when I look at so there's just so many issues but one issue is when I look at my cell phone or my screen, is that it basically has no rhythm. And so in the past, before screens, many people can't probably remember that, but I can. and you'd have a day and you get up and you have your breakfast and then you go to work and then you'd have lunch, and there was this rhythm to the day, and then it would slow down, and then in the evening you'd go to bed. But my cell phone is basically on the same 3 o'clock in the morning, 7 in the morning, in Japan, in San Francisco, in winter, in spring, in summer. It has no time rhythm. And then there's this other, so we're training ourselves to things that have no time rhythm. And then there's this other thing, which I have a feeling we don't even know what we're getting into, which is about how things like the Wi-Fi scape is changing resonance patterns. So
Totally.
we tend to look at we're a thing-based world. So like if you hold a cell phone against your ear and it doesn't grow a tumor, it's safe, right? Because it didn't grow a thing, right?
Yes, quickly enough. They do though. They do.
Right. But there's this whole thing in nature-based medicine we call the resonance scape, that the universe is actually a musical event, and the forms are created around this resonance. And when you look at the Wi-Fi signal exposure over the last 20 years, it's just gotten so much deeper. And when we look at the time rhythm, if you look at like with an EMF reader and you look at your Wi-Fi signal, it has no rhythm. It's like like that. And so we're swimming in this sea, and now we have the 5G satellites coming. And I'm not a 5G conspiracy theorist person. I don't know what this is going to be, but it may be like so many things in human history where we make it something that we think is good, like let's use DDT on crops, let's grow monoculture, let's make a gasoline engine, and without much wisdom, and then we find out, oh, that's much more of a problem. This resonance gate change might be one of those things. Do you have
Mm.
any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, here I kind of let my colors shine a little bit. When I study that sort of history of things that seemed like they could have been a good idea at the time and turned out not to be, and I study those stories deeply, it turns out, and I hate to say it, that actually people knew that they weren't safe
Right, but
and
they
that
were making money on the
but they were making money. And so um, and I can give lots of examples, and it's really part of the public record. You don't need to go anywhere special. You don't need to put your tinfoil hat on. You can just read some really well researched. This is a pattern. This is a theme, and when we look back, if we whether it's a new chemical or a new drug or a new frequency that we're emitting, I can't find any examples where it turned out to be safer than we thought.
right. And because when we intervene in the natural system, it's usually a bad idea.
It's usually a bad idea. So if we philosophically want to believe that things go wrong more due to ignorance than to malice, I'm fine with that. I think that's okay. But then we can just say we probably don't know enough about it, and that makes it unsafe, and we should use a precautionary principle. I think that there is good evidence that 5G is not safe, and I think that there are people who understand that and make a lot of money on it anyways. And then and then brand people who are maybe a little bit skeptical as 5G conspiracy theorists and things like that. But I think that we can approach it from the perspective of the fundamental way that the universe operates is on a resonance scape, and you're just fucking with that basically, and that's probably not a good idea. But also, we know that a lot of these non-native EMF signals will create biofilms, for example, that bacteria will change their form from like kind of individual organisms into a biofilm structure. Like that's scientifically known. And then I think about what a hospital environment looks like. uh, and again, this is just science. I mean, our cells operate primarily in using frequencies. The chemistry is downstream of that, and that's also another way of saying that we live in a resonance scape, right? So we can. The best that I can say about this type of thing is that it's unsafe because we don't know. But what's probably true is that it's unsafe because we do know.
Well,
Um,
let's be generous and say it's a combination of ignorance and avarice.
It's unsafe because of a combination of ignorance and avarice, it's unlikely. It's highly unlikely that it is safe.
I guess the
But
question is like, how unsafe?
right, and that becomes challenging to quantify. And for that sort of thing, we need different ways of looking at things. So
right.
We like to try to keep things simple in terms of cause and effect, and then we have certain scientific ways that we say it's valid to prove that something causes something else. In fact, by the rules of research in terms of what constitutes proving cause and effect, we have not proved that cigarettes cause lung cancer, even though we know that they do. And by any reasonable bar, we would say that the scientific evidence is there. But the pedants
But
who,
not a
well,
direct, not directly. It's all,
well, only because we haven't done a double blind placebo controlled trial, really,
yeah, the people who
right?
smoke and the people who don't, yeah.
Right, but other and randomize them and give them cigarettes, right? But otherwise, we do know this. So we want to be. I think we want to know more about the Church of Science before we, you know.
Right, and it's always, the way this goes is, with like the DDT story, it gets so bad
Mm.
that people just started complaining, and then if the politics is working, then sometimes legislation happens retrospectively. With 5G, it's a little tricky because it's in everything now.
With 5G, it's tricky. So one of my mentors, Jeremy Cornish, talks about rather than trying to find the root cause, we want to look of health issues, let's say, or other societal problems. We want to look at root causes, and we want to look at the causal web. And this is a more helpful way to look at things that is consistent with our complex reality, complex living systems. And another component to it, there is research on 5G. It shows that it has problems, but also humans in the wild are not being exposed to just 5G in a controlled way. They're being exposed to a whole soup of all kinds of things. So in the toxicology literature, which I'm kind of read more of because it's been around longer, and I kind of just stopped reading this stuff because I knew I knew the punchline, but in the toxicology literature, if you look at like how lethal, let's say, mercury is versus lead in mice, and they talk about the L50, which is like the dose that takes to kill 50% of them. If you combine the exposure of mercury and lead, it becomes exponentially more toxic.
Right. And we're swimming in like 40,000 chemicals or
And we're swimming in 40,000 chemicals. And then you got all the frequencies on top of it. It's, I mean, but I remember seeing this graph with the frequencies, and I was like, oh my gosh, which is that you have naturally produced frequencies that are coming from the earth and they're coming from the sky. They're coming from these different places. And then you have a quieter area that's like a valley. Well, the telecommunication industry just has filled up that valley. It's like a frequency landfill.
right. The five now and with the satellites, they're beamed everywhere. I was so surprised that that got done without much discussion, changing the night sky. What was going on with that? Like astronomers are trying to see past the satellites up. Wow, that was kind of mind blowing.
It,
Um,
but it reminds me of like the original explorers in the 1500s, like that they just got on their boats and they came to a new land, and then they just started doing stuff, and there wasn't really anyone to no one stopped them, and they
right.
said, I claim this for blah blah blah, and like there were it's kind of the same. It's like with the sky. It's like, well, I'm just gonna launch this up here. Okay, I'm just gonna do that a few more thousand times. Like nobody's stopping them.
The night sky belongs to all of us. I was like, where was this discussion about changing the night sky? I don't know. And time really is. I think people don't. We have like so many things. We have a simplistic idea about time, and we think it's like a clock and it's linear, and it's basically just counting things off, and you have so many minutes, and then you die or whatever. But that's really a very kind of impoverished view of time, and the Neijing tells us a lot about time. It's really interesting in the passage. The first thing is that they don't talk about time; they talk about time and space and transformation as one thing. And so the idea is whenever there's, like, if we take a breath, for example, we experience as a passage of time, like inhalation, exhalation. We can say that's one breath. But when the breath happened, also the lungs changed space. And also the quality of space time transformed itself. So, what the Neijing says is when there's an expansion of breath, order is created, and then it reaches a peak, and then that order is resolved so that the breath can form another breath embryo. So they never just talk about time, they talk about these three things all at once. Um, the other thing is that they have three notions of time. So one is as a linear experience. By the way, that's very questionable when you dig down into the physics. It's one of those things like, oh, the Earth is flat. It looks that way, but it's really not. You know, the time when you get down into it is not really the way we experience it. But one of them is linear, though. We experience like I was born and then I died, and there was point A and point B. But then there was this aspect of time which many traditional cultures know and use, and that's the idea of cyclical time. And that's the idea of expansion and contraction back and forth. It's times actually measured as breath or like seasons or life cycle or whatever. And that's the nature of time. And then there's this third aspect, which is if time is turning in a circular way or a cyclical way, it means there's a center point to it. And that center point doesn't change, just like the axle of a cart. And that becomes a transcendent viewpoint of time. And so you have linear time, cyclical time, and transcendent time. And those are also mirrored in China and the three main religions that we see, which Chinese people are always blending in this nice way of Taoism, where we talk about cyclical time, kind of Confucianism, maybe, where we talk about more the life cycles as a progression, although that may not hold up so clear, and Buddhism, where we talk about the transcendent aspect of time. And we see in the Neijing also that transcendent aspect of time in the concept of Shen, about how things breathe around light. So we're really, again, starting from a very basic understanding of time. And then because we're connected to nature, we're disassociating ourselves from those patterns and then staring at our screens and things which are reprogramming us to another way.
And there's also a neurological component to this because the way different parts of our brain perceive time is very different. So we've got a, just like most of our body parts, right? We've got a left side of our brain and a right side of our brain, and they perceive reality in different ways, and they have very different relationship with time. Many people are aware that with certain types of ADHD, you get time blindness because with those types of ADHD, you have an overdevelopment of your left hemisphere and an underdevelopment of your right hemisphere. So linear time, clock time, tends to be associated with the left hemisphere. So this is like we'll have lunch at 1, and then more contextual time, nature based time, cyclical time is more perceived by the right hemisphere. So one thing that is happening in our modern times, technology is, the devices are made by people's left hemispheres. So either they are autistic or they are gifted in their left hemisphere. They are creating a device that no matter who you are is biasing you towards your left hemisphere because it's central focus. And not only does the device not respect natural time, but you're doing push-ups with the part of your brain that is not connected to cyclical time,
Right. And
that is connected to
cyclical
linear
time
time.
is really where life sustains us. Linear time is a perception, almost a perception artifact. What's interesting, like when you look at the time calculations in physics, they're time agnostic, they're time neutral, meaning when you look at the formulas, they go either way.
Yeah.
Time can go forward or backwards. And we have this thing, the second law of thermodynamics and entropy about increasing disorder in a closed system. But that actually is not so clear when you look at it a little more closely
The key words you just said are in a
in a
closed
closed system.
system, right? And that means that you're talking about this theoretical construct where you remove context, sorry, right hemisphere, and let's just look at this thing. But what happens when you have an open system? Like even looking at health and energy expenditure and energy input and metabolic rate for humans, nobody discusses that in the context of there being a sun. It's like the sun
Right,
doesn't exist.
right,
Well, I'm pretty sure the sun does exist, and then it has an effect on us and our energy systems.
right.
Yeah.
And our universe is expanding, and then it may end because of entropy, or maybe it'll start to breathe the other way, and something else will happen. And maybe would be the Chinese notion, but it's the cyclical version where life sustains us. It's the breath that where life sustains us. So now we got everybody properly depressed. I think. What 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 can we do?
I was going to add one more because I think that knowledge is power, and I think that just exploring these ideas and understanding them is healing in itself. The one idea I wanted to add is that with the technology piece and the screens and the blue light, one thing, there are a couple things that happen. Again, one more probably innocent, and one probably less innocent. So the light coming off of the screens, one thing that makes them different from natural light from the sun is that they do not contain infrared. Infrared, which is just about half of the light coming from the sun, is not visible. So it wouldn't help you see anything. It would come off as heat. Now, so it's not helpful for you to see your screen, or your computer might not like getting overheated, but you definitely need infrared. So you need that from the sun. So it doesn't. So that's one thing that makes the spectrum different coming off your computer. But the other thing is that it's blue light spiked, and this is a way to hack your cyclical rhythms, because I mentioned before that we get that rise of blue light in the morning that increases our cortisol, which is healthy, right? Healthy is part of a cyclical rhythm that we increase our stress hormones. Now we're more alert, right? So the engineers thought, okay, well, this is like, we'll make this into a digital cup of coffee that they're looking at through the light. So they're hacking our biology in terms of our morning rhythms and what we do with blue light to keep us alert for longer so that we can be more productive. So it's interesting. It's good to know, and knowledge is power, right? So
Right.
there's the kind of the refrain that can never be over repeated about going to nature for answers is going to hold here, and
Right.
uh, sunlight is free, and understanding how your computer works on that level is a useful thing because, like, I have my screen tinted so that it's not blasting me with
I
blue
just
light.
turned on my iris filter. I forgot about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I always use my iris filter, and then I don't worry about it.
Yeah,
It's like not a big deal.
Iris is an app, by the way, that
Iris is an app that converts the spectrum into one that's more biologically healthy and less taxing. I mean, when I first made that switch, it had such an impact. At the end of the day, because I do spend quite a bit of time on the computer.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, my eyes were just really, really tired, and I just never questioned that. I'm like, of course they are. I've been working all day, and when I switched it, I just remember the first few days where they just weren't, and I was like, oh.
Right.
And it never occurred to me that they wouldn't be tired after what I was doing, but it was the light that was coming into them.
There is that thing about being fixed on a focal plane too, where you have to get up
Yes,
and change your eyes and do the eye. Well,
absolutely.
how about if we start at the very beginning? If we talk about like these orders of time sickness. By the way, having a rhythm, as I was saying, allows you to feel a future. Like that you can do something, and the other word for that is called hope. Like if you feel like there's a breath, if you're a plant and you feel there's sunlight through this soil, if I come out and I can grow, I can move into that space, and that's based on rhythm. So it goes to very many deep levels of our cells. But let's go back to the beginning and say, well, if the first level of time sickness is we got everything backwards in terms of root and branches. What does root and branch mean? It means every breath in the universe arises out of an impulse or a root, and it expands out and it returns to regenerate itself. And that's like in every breath. And if we look at those patterns, the first one is the patterns of the cosmos. That's the root. They create nature. So for us, that's our second root. The third is our teachings and our wisdoms from accumulated knowledge. That's another root. And so just like the river has a source and then it flows down, it doesn't flow the other way, we need to get that kind of back. And so when we talk about nature based medicine or nature based thinking in general, that's one way to restore that first level problem of time sickness. What do you think about that idea?
Absolutely. And as you were describing that, one idea that came to mind is that people who excel in almost any field kind of understand this. That in diverse fields, whether it's kind of more intellectual sports, that they understand how to look backwards at trends or look backwards at what's been going in order to act appropriately
Right.
now,
And
right?
so even and under like even our understanding of history has been greatly diminished recently. And so
Yeah,
there's this whole loss about where did we come from? Who are we? What are our ideas? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
So that's a first step. Like, stop thinking that the future, Elon Musk is going to Mars. Great. I think he should. But, for the rest of us, and by the way, that doesn't mean not continuing scientific exploration.
Mm.
It just means like that our scientific exploration today is built on patterns that created us and wisdoms that came before us and patterns in the cosmos that made our planet, as opposed to those are irrelevant and things are in the future.
It's almost, it's like picking up a different intellectual thread, because I think part of this idea of valuing new innovation above everything else, again, I think that came out of certain specific historical things. So one thread of this is that there was a lot of money invested in certain types of technology during World War II. And then when World War II ended, there was this question of what to do with that, and what to do with those contracts, what to do with the capital, with the equipment, all that stuff, and that kind of got repurposed into this better living through technology movement that affected everything. But like the reason why we use poison to clean our houses is dates back, from this, that there wasn't a problem with the stuff that they were using to clean stuff. Like they didn't need fixing, right? Um, and then speaking to people who would be watching this who are genuinely inquisitive and they genuinely want to understand. They want to understand how the universe works. They want to understand how to help people. And so what happens is that when you look at the scientific literature, not all of it, but a lot of it came through this intellectual thread of we don't know anything until we discover it through science in the future.
Right.
We
Like, you
and
wouldn't
we need
even know
to,
you're in love unless it was proven by a study.
right, exactly. Unless it's proven by a study, we don't know anything. We didn't know anything. Anybody who thought they knew anything was prehistoric and superstitious,
They were,
and
yeah, they were ignorant.
they were ignorant. Like common sense, we don't need common sense. We need science, right? So when you look at the scientific literature, if you're someone who's kind of inclined towards uh, science, which is to say that you are curious about understanding how things work and you want to look at them more closely, and then we have this edifice of scientific literature. A lot of what's in there, most of what's in there, comes from this intellectual thread of we don't know anything until we spend a lot of money to zoom in on this thing, and we're going to get rid of the context and we're going to pretend that it's a closed system when the only thing we know is that it's an open system, right? And do that.
Mm.
So by exploring these ideas that you're presenting from the Neijing, it allows us to go off on a probably more fruitful intellectual thread where we're actually inquiring and doing science that's more consistent with how reality works.
Mhm. By the way, the traditional people, they were scientists. Like the Neijing is a science, and not to forget that. But yeah, I agree with that too. So maybe the first kind of order is like when you wake up, remembering that the sun nourishes you and the patterns in nature created you, and they're created by deeper patterns in the cosmos, and the food you eat supports you. I mean, some very basic things that traditional people know that modern people have kind of forgotten. To reset this thing about the past and maybe valuing traditional wisdoms and things like that.
Absolutely. And even I think one of the my favorite places to start with people that I learned from you is with the four directions, because part of this thread of like everything will be better in the future once we figure it out. The traditional people didn't know anything, is also if you're not a scientist, you don't know anything.
Right.
You don't know, where's your PhD? Why then you're not entitled to have an opinion. You're not, the common sense. Well, that's for non-intellectual people, right? And that is, it's like an assault on common sense, and it pervades everything, and especially health. So by helping to orient, which is a great word because it means find the east, orient people to what they can know to be true, which is where the four directions are.
Right. The sun rises on the east. It says,
Sunrise is in the east, and you don't need to take my word for it or your word for it. You can just
go out in the
observe
garden.
it,
Yeah.
right? And I love that as a place to start, and that is, also comes from many traditional traditions, wisdom traditions, but it's like a starting point because no matter what happens your day, that's going to be true, and that can allow you to a be centered in the present,
Mhm.
and b start there to explore. You know.
And then maybe, and this is I've learned from you a lot. You've inspired me a lot about, which I know all this stuff about following the seasonal and daily rhythms, but you encouraged me to go out in my garden in the morning and sit before the UV light gets high. And boy, that really just changed my life to go out and first thing in the morning and feel the sun rising and sync with the rhythm of the day and how that changes over a year. And how the day is like a year, the morning's like spring, the noon is like, the summer, and the evenings like autumn, the nights like winter, and feeling we want to get to this phase where we feel that we're not breathing, nature is breathing us. So that we're in a breathing field, we're created by that field, and that we're syncing up.
Yeah.
And even though the Wi-Fi from my neighbors coming over the fence, it's like kind of puny in comparison to the sun, you know?
Yeah, and we can, while the the resonance scape is being encroached upon with non-native EMFs, things like sun exposure and grounding can help mitigate some of that, right? That these frequencies pass through you. So part of the problem as well of these compounding, the causal web, is that also until the 1950s, until we had better living through science and rubber-soled shoes, we were in contact with the Earth, and that was just, I mean, humans didn't even leave the Earth until the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we were always in contact with the earth. And so things would pass through us and we'd have this electron flow, right? And things would be discharged. So it's this for people who are unaware and who are just kind of like, unfortunately, and this is without judgment, but kind of just going with the flow of what's happening. Well, then they are in a sea of non-native EMFs and disconnected from the earth. And that's the double whammy, So
Right.
I like to talk because it can, I'm sure it can feel overwhelming to keep yourself centered and healthy and sane without being obsessed, without breaking the bank, all this stuff. But I like to think about 1% marginal gains where you just make a little tweak. Sometimes it can be a one-off thing, like having Iris on my laptop. Like I don't think about that, right? But there was a time where I had to think about it. Which what app do I get? How much does it cost? How do I install it? How does it work? Right. So you need to use that bandwidth. But I've been using it for years. I don't think about it. But then the same thing with grounding. It's like, okay, well, does that become part of your daily habit? You don't have to have everything perfect. You can't control everything in your environment. But if you bring that in, does that just help nudge things in the right direction for you?
Yeah, and these powers are so strong. It's easy to go down a rabbit hole with 5G and think, the end of the world is here and I can't take a breath and so forth. But then you go out and you feel the sun and you're in your garden and the garden seems to be working okay. And, relatively speaking, and you're part of that. And then you just feel like, oh man, this is so much stronger than the little things. Of course we want to work on 5G or whatever, but when you sync back up with nature, it's like it's so strong. It's kind of viscerally impressive. I don't know if you have that experience. And this goes to like nature medicine too. Not talking about like the herbs you pick to make tea, but like nature. I remember when we were down in California at that practicum in July, and we went out to the Yuba River. Maybe I told you about this. And I was feeling the medicine of lying on a rock at 10 o'clock in the morning with the sun coming over the valley and shining on my body and the cold water going next to me. And man, that was a medicine. That was like this very, very strong medicine. And the rock, the quality of the rock and the water. And wow, that was something. And then there's also maybe the next thing is like anywhere you can recontact rhythms. I think that's really good. So, like in the morning, I get up, I make my espresso with my Italian machine. I think about my Italian teacher. I feed the cat. I do these things. I do some work. Then it's lunchtime. Then I do this. Then I go for a walk. And those tell my body, like, the day is passing in this way. It's breathing and taking part in the rhythms that go up and down. Like, sometimes you want to lay down, sometimes you want to work. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think, I tend to like to help people focus on daily and weekly
Hmm.
rhythms because that's where people will tend to have most leverage. Well, your only leverage is in the present, right? So, but like they'll have be able to do something in the daily and weekly rhythm because also it can be hard to do everything that you want. If you think about things fractally, right? It might be hard to for some people, depending on their schedule, to exercise every day. But if we could look at that on a weekly, or maybe you don't even want to exercise every day, but on a weekly rhythm, and I'm usually working with people who are quite ill and maybe time strapped, so that will help them to take action and to make meaningful shifts. So then, as things change, then they can look at longer time horizons. A lot of the self help literature has you focusing on these really long time horizons. You know what, though? You need to be neurologically healthy for your nervous system to allow you to do that. Because if your nervous system feels like it's being chased by a tiger, it's not allowing you to focus on your life
Right.
plan.
That brings in like such an important point. I'm so glad, which is that we often forget about the ingredient in time and healing
Hmm.
and learning, for example. And so, for example, in Western medicine, to suppress an illness, we can do immediately. Like if you come into the emergency room and your blood pressure is 210 over 120, I can bring it down immediately. But to heal always takes time. And time is the ingredient that we forget about. And that scale can be very long. You know, it can be years. Learning's the same way. You can learn something right away in a YouTube clip, but deep learning that changes you, which we call long learning, which is where you show up to the same thing like a potter at their studio every day, and they learn over time. And that ingredient of time, that's would be the third aspect of time sickness, I think, is we've lost this idea about what happens when we give time. You know, like when I moved into this house 20 years ago, it was all grass. And then slowly, and one way to landscape it would be get a landscaper to drive all the trees in and put it in. But the way we did it was you put in one plant here and it grows a season and then another one here. And then they learn how to live together. And over time, this whole thing changes. And so that there's that time ingredient in our lives and in healing work, I think that we don't understand very well.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think that the distinction that I've now been able to make through my own healing journey and working with patients is that it usually comes from seeing the problem with extremes and finding the middle path, which is there's, you know, kind of one bias towards immediate, response, right? So like suppress the thing, take the thing, feel better, this. And then on the other hand, there's like that kind of saying time heals everything, which I don't know if I believe it from an aging philosophical perspective. If we say that dying is part of healing, well, fantastic. But in terms of actually getting better,
Right.
time on its own,
I mean,
I
now
don't
fix your
think.
dislocated elbow.
Yeah, yeah, time isn't going to fix your dislocated elbow, right? Time on its own, it's an ingredient, but it's not going to fix. And so, what I've found is really important is that it's a both and that people need to have appropriate and realistic uh, time horizon expectations for their healing, which are often going to be longer. And we need to have valid markers of progress on the way to know that we are making progress. And it's not necessarily going to be linear, but if we just say, like, time fixes everything, this is going to take a year. Oh, it's 3 months in and you still feel the same. Well, just keep trying. It takes a while. And that's how I was trained in functional medicine. It was very frustrating. And well, it takes like 6 months or 12 months to fix a leaky gut, and you're 3 months in. Well, no, now I understand that it can take a long time for someone to get better, and there should be certain ways in which they are feeling better much sooner. That let
Right.
us know that we are walking in the right paths. So it's a both and.
And I don't know if you've had this experience, but when working with bodies, what I see is when we get the story and the language and the body feels like it's on the road, then it really relaxes. It's when it's not on the right road and things are not, and the person's telling the wrong story that the body kind of gets upset about it. Um, there's this thing, we talk about that the path of the universe is always tending towards healing. That means the natural state of things is healing. And when we look at an ill part of the body, there's a lot of things that define it, but one is it's not participating in that current of healing. And so our job with healing is not to fix it, but to look at the area and figure out how to allow it to return to participate in the natural current towards healing.
Mm. Absolutely. That's actually another theme that's come up for me recently in terms of various healing modalities, is that there are certain types of, I guess I'd say modalities or approaches that for the person is quite, it can be passive. And it's not to say that those are never helpful or never appropriate, but what can happen is that the person can feel better or be better in that passive stance. But once they get up to do something, it reverts, like the pain comes back. And so that even if something starts off kind of passive or receiving, that there's something to be said for, okay, well then next, now let's get your body moving, and how can we make it feel safer, pain free when it's doing that, that then the effects can kind of integrate a bit better.
Yeah. And we don't see the medicine of time. We don't feel it. It's like the most healing thing. But I agree, it's not just don't do anything and time heals everything. That's just kind of lazy. But it's like we want to keep the body when they come participating in the motion and returning it back. So it's like going back into a river in a certain way, and the river is healing itself, but you're out of the river, and so we're helping you go back into the river. Then maybe what are some other specific, like when I think about technology, that's like a huge one. It's kind of more nuts and bolts, but to me, the first step is always like technology is a tool, and the first question is, do you work for it or does it work for you?
Yeah.
And that means like, do I just like turn on the internet and then look at TikTok and then like do everything it asks me to do? Or do I sit down with a piece of paper, which I really encourage, and think it's like a screwdriver? What do I use technology for? Like I use it to make lectures and things. You use it to talk to your patients. Fine. How do you use that as a tool and, to answer emails, whatever? And that's it, kind of.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, what comes to mind is, I was recently having a conversation with someone about human needs, and there's the kind of looking at, if we're talking about technology and how to be in a better relationship with it, we can look at the technology and what we're using it for, but also look at everything else. So, is there something either that you're avoiding in your
Right, like talking
analog
to an
world?
actual person or your
Yeah,
neighbor,
or is there something that you're missing there that you're trying to get here? So
like
one
connection.
reason that people yeah, one reason that people use technologies for connection, and if there's a bit of a like catch 22, is if they're missing it in their current world, then they're getting sucked into the virtual world, which is not going to be as rich a connection, but then you kind of lose your social skills and you lose your energy because you're become addicted in this way. I mean, in the past, I'm someone, for whatever reasons, I would say I'm a kind of, I think I'm probably more prone to getting addicted to technology perhaps than the average person for a variety of reasons. And this has gone on kind of probably longer than most people. But when I would travel abroad, technology addiction would go away by itself immediately. Like it was, I wasn't trying. The kind of impulse to check email or to check social media went away. So what happened? The environment changed. So what was happening in the environment? Well, probably a lot of things, but there was more connection, more rhythm, more nowness. The kind of the quality of time was different. And so, and this that theme comes up a lot with addiction to anything. But when we're talking about having a good relationship with technology, we are talking about uh, very serious addiction that is kind of socially acceptable and not seen the same as being addicted to a substance, but it absolutely should be.
Oh, it's
And
it's the biggest addiction in the world today, screens.
yeah, exactly. So any studies, kind of looking at, for example, heroin use in Vietnam soldiers, that there was this expectation, when during Vietnam, I don't remember the exact numbers, but like a huge number of soldiers became addicted, and there was this kind of real fear that they would all come back and then just be addicts. And what surprised the policymakers and researchers is that the vast majority, once they came home, did not
Mhm.
maintain addicted. And again, what had happened is for them, they were not they were no longer in a very dangerous place in a foreign culture and all of these things with uncertainty, and they were back home with many of them with family and friends and so on, and they stopped using. So I think that it's important in that conversation to talk about not technology when we're talking about technology.
And that goes to this thing we see all the time in healthcare, which is you rarely heal people by telling them why they should do something else, but by offering them a better version that they want to go to. So we've talked about that before, but it's like you're on your little island, which is dysfunctional, but you don't want to leave it and someone telling you you should leave it does not make you leave it. What makes you leave it is someone coming up with a better island where everybody's having fun. And then
Yeah.
like, I want to like leave it and go there. So like when we reach nature-based medicines like that too, when we return to the stories of nature, like they're so much more fun. There's so much,
Yeah.
like the community's fun, going to the river's fun. It's like, yeah, stop looking at your phone. Let's go to the river and have, talk about this. So yeah, that's a big part of it. You can't just tell people like, don't look at your screen so much. Yeah, you have to show them something better. Well, what else? I found it amazing to change when I changed my iPhone. I'm colorblind, but I changed my iPhone from color screen to monochrome screen, and boy, did that change things. And I could feel good, like cold turkey. The first day was like, I don't feel good, because the bright lights aren't going like this. And you can do that in your accessibility settings. Just turn
Yeah.
everything to black and white, and that, like all those colored lights that are coming at you, that's a big one. Turn off all the notifications.
Yes,
Yeah,
I turned off all the notifications on my phone a long time ago, partly because I literally would not be. It's funny to me that the little guardrails, little bumpers that I've put on in lanes of technology because I still use it more than I'd like to, and sometimes I'm using it more compulsively than I'd like to. I mean, but notifications. If my notifications were on, I don't think I would be able to function. Like,
they all go
and
off. They all go off.
they've been might have been off for years, but then I forgot. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, people have notifications on their." I'm like, "How would I be able to do
I
anything?"
mean, if you're a
Not
grown,
because I'm
if you
important.
have
It's
a
like
if you have a
it's
child, you
BS.
need to leave the notifications on. It's fine, but everything else like should go off. And
Yeah, and
yeah,
and and now I think people can see this because the notifications are kind of obnoxious. Like, when it first started, it was like, "Well, you
ding.
wanna you wanna be notified when you get a text or an email because it could be important," and people kind of bought into that a little bit where I'm like, "I'm not that important." Like, nobody's emailing me, like, anything time sensitive, you know? But then it's like every app has notifications, and you can start to see how ridiculous it is.
Yeah,
Like, that there's just so much stuff you don't need to know about in real time, you know? So I think that's probably hopefully become more,
and then like
general.
and cutting your email down to email zero is like a big huge one too. Like instead of like one of my friends has, I was talking to him and he had literally I think 20,000 emails in his inbox.
Yeah, I can't do that. I'm an email, inbox 0
It's like,
type of
yeah, that has to go too. Anyway, so we're going to return to nature's patterns. We're going to have more fun down at the river. We're going to sit in the sun. We're going to talk to actual people. We're going to use our technology, but to help further things. And this, like there's a deeper thing question about technology, which is really interesting. One is like, does it use you or do you use it? That's one thing. But the other thing is like with AI I now and all those things. So if you did have all this free time, what do these tools serve? Is it just to make more money? Is it just to be more popular? Or is there something deeper about being human that things like AI can serve? Deeper things, meaningful things. That's a real interesting question. You have any thoughts of that as we're finishing up today?
Oh, I don't know if I tell my honest thoughts on what AI
That's a
is
whole
probably
different show.
is probably for. Yeah, that's a whole different show. I was trying to leave people not depressed, but I think with these things, we'll go back to the idea that tools can be used, in different ways.
Right.
So, and for sure, while I think that there are potentially problematic things about AI that maybe not enough people are aware of, and people should be very cautious. And we should have more legislation around it. And it's going to be interesting. We're going to be living in interesting times, probably. I think it's still a tool. And I mean, actually, this is quite funny. I've used Chat GPT for advice around like personal issues and relationship issues, and it's been extremely insightful and very helpful. And while I don't think it would should replace going to a therapist or anything like that, I mean, really, just really excellent, and where I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right, and just very, yeah. So you can use it in different ways. It saves me time on different things. I can ask it for lots of stuff. Also, I spend a lot of my time correcting AI, of course, which this is maybe another topic for another time. But I'm in my 40s now, and I have a certain area of knowledge where I've developed over time a high level of expertise. So when I ask ChatGPT a question, then I can see if it's giving me the wrong answer. And then I can challenge it or teach it or show it, right? But if I were 20,
You don't know.
I don't know. And it sounds so authoritative and it
Mhm.
sounds like the truth. And I wouldn't be able to know. And I would think that I did know. And so that's a bit of an unfortunate thing. I think that there probably are places in the world where they're educating uh, kids and college students and university students on critical thinking around this, but there's going to be just the general population who's just this is going to turn into like God or their magic eight ball or whatever. And so again, we're going to have these like reality tunnels. But if you go back to nature, you're never going to get the wrong answer about where east is.
No, we start there, and it goes back to a deeper question like why do you get up in the morning? Why are you alive? Is it just to get more likes on Facebook, whatever, to have more money? I don't think so. That's junk food diet of life. But I can tell you the aging kind of the quick answer. It's that breath and light are the things that drive the world. And the closer we are to breath and light, and breath and light includes communion with people in the world and so forth. So when we are if we use AI to help us experience breath and light and communion, or any of our tools, which they can be used for that, then it seems to be a positive outcome. I mean, I think that's, you could say, is the point of view of the aging and maybe nature. It's not to get more likes, not to have more money. Those are all separation illnesses and things like that. But if it can somehow, like if social media can make a community, that brings in breath and light and communion, that's a good use of a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least that's a starting point. But I
I
think
like
we need to have that discussion because we're not even asking the question.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like with many things, people because it takes less energy to think of things in terms of black and white. So you just decide if it's good or bad. Whereas it takes more energy, but you often arrive somewhere a little more helpful if you say, okay, well, I mean, Facebook, for example, for me, like I've made so many, actually, like some of my most important and cherished connections, real life connections, have come from Facebook community. So, I think, yeah, we want to move away from good or bad, and use it that way to help improve the circulation of breath and light.
And it's a problem when people are in a a chaotic rhythm field. Creative thinking, going back to your root, making a new idea, expressing it, moving forward, that's an aspect of rhythm. So if people are swimming in a chaotic rhythm pool, their ability to create new solutions also becomes diminished. So maybe the first thing is to kind of just shake your head off. The sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. Mel told me to go sit in the garden without my clothes on and feel the sun between 8 and 9, which is great. And then again in the evening, Ed told me to have rhythms during the day. We were going to kind of put this thing on our phone. All those things help us kind of get out of the chaos pool and then reset our thinking a bit. And nature's always the source of that. Yeah.
Well, and I should show my nature based inspired
Yeah.
splash
Oh, yeah.
screen.
The answer is not in your phone. That's one of our sayings. Yeah. It's there, but your phone can help you, or cannot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is that enough about time? time is one of those places, like, I think there's great learning and great resources if we investigate it and think about it again, you know?
I think it's a useful lens for looking at most problems
Yeah.
and how to
Okay.
solve them.
All right. We did it again. Okay. And next time
See
we'll talk about something else.
see you next time. Yeah, next time, I'm hoping we will talk about something else.
Will
Yes.
that be in cyclical time, linear time, or transcendent time?
There's a lot of cyclical time that happens with the next topic.
Okay.
All
All
about
right.
timing.
Okay, we'll come on. All right. Take care. See you next week.
See you next week.